Ahava and blessings to all of you, and welcome to Mystical Pathways. Today, my heart is warmed and I feel excited. I feel enthusiastic. I feel blessed because we have Matthew Fox with us. And for those of you who do not know who Matthew Fox is, I do want to read just a little bit about him. He's a spiritual theologian, an Episcopal priest, and he is an international author. He likes to commune spirituality, ecology, and mysticism. He has written many books, all translated into many languages. One of these books that many of you probably know of is The Cosmic Christ, The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, Original Blessing. And he is the founder of Creation Spirituality Movement. These words just describe a little bit of what he brings and births and has manifested. I honor his commitment, I honor his service, I honor his wisdom, his love, and his interconnection, and his wanting to create a reality of unity and goodness in the world. And before we go straight into our beautiful sacred talk with Matthew Fox, we're just going to tune in, and I am going to chant the Shalom Lech Mariam, the Hail Mary in Aramaic. Shalom Lech Mariam al Yatepu Moranamech O Kadish Tu Mariam O Ambrachu Ferotam Charsach Shalom Lech Mariam al Yatepu Moranamech O Kadish Tu Mariam O Ambrachu Ferotam Charsach Shalom Lech Mariam al Yatepu Moranamech O Kadish Tu Mariam O Ambrachu Ferotam Charsach O Kadish Tu Mariam 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 O Kadish Tu Mariam. Amen. I do have a little bit of information on you. That's you're a theologian. Yeah, and you were a priest. You are a priest still, aren't you?
Yes, I was a priest in the Catholic Church,
Yes.
and I was in the Dominican order for 34 years and a priest for 25. But then I got expelled from the order for, among other things, being a feminist theologian. That was one of the complaints from Rome, and the other was that I call God Mother, though I've proven that all the medieval mystics, well, not all, but many of them call God Mother, especially Eckhart and Julian of Norwich. And that I work too closely with Native Americans, and I prefer original blessing to original sin, and I don't condemn homosexuals. So those were the main complaints against me, and they silenced me for a year. Then 3 years later, they expelled me. And then I wrote my book on the reinvention of work, and the last chapter is on reinventing ritual. And I said we have to bring the body back to ritual, among other things. And lo and behold, the weekend after I submitted my book to the publisher, a group of 5 or 6 young people from Sheffield, England, flew into Seattle for a weekend conference I was doing on creation spirituality. And they were taking rave into the Episcopal or Anglican Church, combining rave and liturgy. So I thought that was great. I mean, that's bringing the body back. So, make a long story short, I flew to Sheffield, checked it out. I was very impressed. And then I said, how can I help you guys? These were young people, and most of them from the streets, because it was a time of the collapse of the mines and so forth in near Sheffield, and there's a lot of unemployment and a lot of use in people's homes, and a lot of these young kids have been kicked out of their homes by their drunken fathers because there's always a lot of alcoholism when there's unemployment. And so they banded together as a community, and were and then they went to the Anglican church, local church, and said, we want to bring this to church. And the pastor said, great. And but then they got kicked out of the church after 6 months. The pastor said, I have complaints. There are too many young people in church. Too many young people in church. That was the last time that sentence has ever been uttered in the West. And so then they found a secular place downtown and did it. So that's where I encountered them. And I said, how can I help you guys? And they said, well, you could run interference if you became an Episcopal priest because you understand what we're doing. We're using your theology, the cosmic Christ, and so forth. So I thought about it and prayed about it. And I came to the conclusion the Pope had fired me. He doesn't need me anymore. So I went to the Anglican bishop, Episcopal bishop in San Francisco, near where I lived. I said, I'm thinking of becoming Episcopal priest, but only for one reason, to work with young people to reinvent forms of worship. And make a long story short, he said, go for it. He said, we're not doing anything for the young people. So I became an Episcopal priest precisely for that purpose, to create what we could now call the Cosmic Mass. And we've done over 125 of these masses in North America, and it's powerful, and it draws a lot of people from many traditions, and I really believe it's a future because we're using postmodern art forms like DJ and VJ and rap and so forth. And so that's what I've done. I was 20 for 25 years. I was a Catholic priest in good standing, and now I'm an Episcopal priest after what 28 years or so. So that's my little story there.
Amazing, amazing.
We did it at the World
Yeah,
Parliament of Religions this past fall in Chicago, and we've done it at many places, but it's always powerful to do it there because you get a real mix of people,
yes.
indigenous and Buddhist, Jewish and atheist come, and humanists come, and Christians of all stripes. So I think it's the future when it comes to ritual. And of course, I'm very grateful what the women have been doing. Starhawk was on my faculty for years. Oh, that was another complaint from the Vatican, was that I have a witch on my faculty, and they were very, what should I say, aware of that. I told her one day, I said, you're keeping them up at night in the Vatican. She said, why? I said, every letter that comes complaining about it has that sentence in it. It says, and he has a witch on his faculty. And she said, I don't know why they're threatened by me. She said, we didn't burn any of them at the stake. So that's Starhawk's wit and political consciousness there.
Amazing.
Anyway, you asked me a question that kind of got me
I
going.
love it. I love what you answered because I mean, I don't know, I prepare things and I write them, but it's just so beautiful to flow with you because what you just said, I could be hours talking about it because it's so powerful. Um, I know that you've written many books and they're translated to many languages, actually. The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, that's one that has expanded greatly, right? And I think all of your books, I mean, there is this like unity or this integration with spirituality, the body, ecology, mysticism, and this wanting to bring together an experience of unity, right? Of unity, of like bringing in all the tribes. I like to call them all the different tribes, and at the same time transcending at some point the dogmatic, right? That's what I what I feel. I don't know, in what I perceive in some of your writings, like I'm truly fascinated by creation spirituality, right? And I think that's the first question that I wrote down. How did this start? What does it mean to you? How do we weave in art? Because for me, art is my prayer. Music is my
Mm,
prayer. Dance is my prayer. And it always has been as a child, growing up as a Catholic, right?
mm.
And the only way I could feel is when I would maybe go with my father to lay roses on the statue of Mother Divine. I could feel the energy. But when I was just listening to the mass, nothing against mass, I love mass and I love
Uh-huh.
synagogues and I love all temples. I felt empty sometimes. But in
Mm.
those moments where I could move my body, where I could see the statue, where I could smell the roses, where I could see the women praying the rosary, I really felt the power of presence. And for me, that's a form of creation spirituality. And so that's the question. Um, how did you perceive this? How did you feel it? How did it evolve? And what does it look like? Right?
Well, I grew up in the state of Wisconsin, pardon me, which is the heartland, and it's very much a state with a lot of farming and also with Native American presence there. When I was a child, I had Native American dreams on a regular basis. And the Native American spirit is still very much on the land there. And this is why I'm sure the reason I was having these dreams. But also, um, Madison, Wisconsin, where I grew up, it's a university town, University of Wisconsin, but also a capital. So the politics is there too. And but there are four seasons. It's very it could get very cold and snowy in the winter. And so spring was a big deal, moving beyond winter. And summer, there are 5 lakes within the city limits. And so there is so much to do in the summer, whether it's canoeing or fishing or water skiing and so forth. And in the fall, I love very much because of the leaves changing color and all that. So I was just very moved by the wonder and the beauty of nature. And so when I went into the Dominican, I went to a public school, high school. My best friends were Jewish or Protestant or agnostic, and we'd have these wonderful debates with each other. And I'd go to my parish priest, who was a Dominican, and he would give me uh, G.K. Chesterton to read or Thomas Aquinas to read. And I really loved that. And he was Dominican. The parish was Dominican priest. And I love that there was this intellectual side to faith as well. And I really love that dialectic. And I remember especially my favorite masses were Saturday, because Saturday was always dedicated to Mary. And they had these wonderful passages from the wisdom literature, like I walk in the sky and I walk in the sands of the deep, things like that. And I play before God before the creation of the world. I was very moved by the what I now realize was the mystical literature of Judaism.
Yeah.
But the church, to its credit, I'm not sure it really knew consciously what it was doing, but at least it was bringing the divine feminine in there. And
Mm.
as a boy growing up in the 50s, football was important to me and cars were important. But this gave me something else. I felt things in church, especially on Saturdays, that was different from anything else going on around me. And it was a divine feminine. And it was there. And that's why I was so attracted to Mass, especially on Saturdays. So anyway, when I went in the Dominicans and got all this training, but then I went to my superiors in 1963, I think it was, and I said to them, we don't have any courses on spirituality here. We have all these practices, and we chant and we fast and we meditate and all that, but no courses about it. I said you should have someone with a doctorate in spirituality, because I said my generation is going to be less interested in religion, more interested in spirituality, which is, of course, the experiential side of religion, like you're talking about, the roses and all that. And they said, long story short, they said, okay, you can go to Europe and study spirituality. And then I wrote Thomas Merton, the Catholic monk in Gethsemane, a Trappist monk and a great writer, and asked him where to go. And he said, go to Paris. So that's where I went to Paris. And it's there that I met my mentor, Père Chenu, Chenu, who was a Dominican theologian from the French uh, province and was very influential in Vatican II. And he's the one who named the creation spiritual tradition for me. He said there are two traditions in Christianity. There's a fall redemption. It begins with the fall and so it focuses on the redemption. Then there's this other one that's creation spirit. It begins with creation. And that's what interested me. And it's about justice and it's about art, of course. We are co-creators, and the Holy Spirit is the spirit of creativity. So I a lot of my work, a lot of my teaching and pedagogy has been to bring in art as meditation, because so much of Western academia is all about the left hemisphere of the brain, and it does not treat the intuitive brain and the creative brain and the mystical brain. So that's what I try to do. I've been as involved in trying to change education as I have tried to change religion, which makes me very masochistic, because Thomas Berry said the two greatest failures of the 20th century were religion and education. And I've been involved in both for 50 years. And I can attest that he's right, just from the wounds I've undergone from both. But yeah, I think we have to bring that creativity back, what I call the via creativa. And art is meditation, is what I call it. And
Yeah.
that's how you teach the intuitive brain. That's how you bring the mystic alive. And if the mystic is not alive in religion, religion is dead. It's just playing games. And the late Father B. Griffith, a wonderful monk who lived in India for over 50 years in an ashram there, a Christian ashram, but that very much echoed the ashram of the Hindu tradition there. He once said that if Christianity cannot recover its mystical tradition and teach it, it should just fold up and go out of business. It has nothing to offer. So that's really been my life's work, is trying to bring that mystical dimension back. And the key, I think, is art as meditation. I mean, there are many kinds of meditation. There's sitting on a cushion, there's that emptying meditation, what psychologists call introvert meditation, but there's also art as meditation. And so when I created programs, I had people in my faculty, like MC Richards, who's a great potter. She taught clay as meditation. We had dance as meditation. We had chanting, of course, as meditation. We had dreams as meditation, poetry, and so forth. These are all ways to exercise that intuitive brain, which does not get exercised in 95% of education in the West, including seminaries. Uh, uh, the West is mystically illiterate, I think, pretty
Yes.
much at this time in history. And that's why we're so dangerous.
Yeah.
And we're boring our young.
Yes, yes, no, what you say is so powerful because, like I said, I'm fascinated with creation spirituality. One of another question that I wanted to ask you and talk about, which is for me means a lot, and it is connected to all of this. I think everything that we'll be talking about is so connected. When I discovered through my mother's line, we have the Sephardic roots, right? So, Spain has that Jewish tradition and the Muslim tradition. And so I started to become fascinated to looking more into that Jewish side of my heritage. And this took me to live in the Middle East. I was doing a PhD and I went to Egypt to study and to get information. I did a PhD in dance movement therapy, and dance is prayer, of course, was my
Oh,
thesis.
oh, great,
And
great.
so When I was in Egypt, and I had been exposed to Aramaic before and to the Dead Sea Scrolls when I was in university, but
Mm,
I met this teacher of mine, and he was a great mentor. And
mm,
he always, talked about Yeshua as being Jewish, and we know that he was a Hebrew, right? And I always feel that there's such a strong disconnect from who he really was and how they teach him, especially in Catholicism in Spain, right? It's like cut off that Jewish, right? Heritage completely. It's like Catholic,
mm,
the Catholic kings, right, who kicked everyone out who
mm,
wasn't Catholic, and
yeah.
and in the West as well, right? And when we bring back the true Yeshua, the Aramaic Yeshua, the Hebrew Yeshua, I see this connection, the true connection with the mystical Yeshua, the artist, the mystic who believed in that direct connection, like the mystic with Allah, with God, with divine mother, father, whatever, divine presence. We all use different names. And so I wanted to ask, in all of your experience, because I honor you so much with everything that you've done and you're doing, how do you feel? How would you express? And how do you feel as do you feel that there has also been this disconnect that has damaged maybe our relationship with Yeshua?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a few examples. First of all, I'm so glad that you went that path, the path of recovering the Jewish Jesus, so the authentic Jesus, and of the Aramaic, which, as you know, but too few people know, was Jesus' language. It's a
Yeah.
tribal version of Hebrew, as you know, a peasant version, really, and he was a peasant. And you say he was an artist, and parable telling, creating these stories, that's art. It's an
It's
art
an
form.
art. Yes.
And his father was a carpenter, so he had that craft too. And his family were peasant farmers, so he had all that. And it's all about art. I mean, farming is an art, and unless you turn it into a big agribusiness machine thing. But clearly, in Jesus' day, it was that. Now, I did my master's thesis in theology with the Dominicans on Jesus' prayer in the New Testament, and it really radicalized me. And I remember saying that the only way Christianity is going to renew itself is to become more Jewish, to reconnect to its Jewish roots. And this was before I ever went to Europe and learned about Christ spirituality. And you see, in the Jewish tradition, there's no understanding of original sin at all.
No.
And I learned that when I first started to teach, after I returned to America. And there was a Jewish woman who worked a lot with Rabbi Heschel, because I was in Chicago and Heschel was in Chicago. And she came up to me after class one day, and I was teaching in a Catholic women's college, Barra College, north of Chicago. And she said, "What's this thing called original sin that the students were talking about?" Well, I said, the fall and all that. She said, "I've been a Jew all my life, and I've never heard a rabbi or anyone else talk about original sin." That was a hell of an opening for me, an awakening. And by the way, one of the reasons the Vatican condemned me was because of original blessing versus original sin. And so I came up with that idea a few years later about original blessing, and that's Jewish. And so are the four paths of Greek spirituality: the via positiva, joy and wonder and awe; the via negativa, which is emptying and silence, and also darkness and suffering; the via creativa, which we've talked about, creativity and art; and then the via transformative, which is about justice and healing and compassion. And those are the four paths that I developed around as a structure of our spiritual journeys. Now, they are in contrast to the three paths that were being taught in Spain and other Catholic countries: purgation, illumination, and union. And that leaves out joy, leaves out justice, leaves out creativity. I mean, except for that, it's just great. But so that's what the biggest thing I've done really is to shift from the three paths to the four. And I was lecturing about that years ago at GTU in Berkeley, at Graduate Theological Union. And afterwards, this man came up to me. He was all excited. short fellow, but his eyes were big as grapefruit. He said, I am a rabbi. I studied with Rabbi Shalem I'm from Switzerland, in Switzerland. And of course, Rabbi Shalem was a great scholar of Jewish mysticism. And he said, you are the first Christian theologian I've ever heard who threw out those three paths, purgation, illumination, union. And these four paths you're talking about, those are Jewish. And he said, now we have a bridge between Jewish spirituality and Christian spirituality. And also your emphasis on wisdom and Christ as wisdom, that's another bridge we haven't crossed, but we can, because that's at the heart of Judaism too. And he said, I'm so excited. I want to talk more, but I have to fly out tomorrow back home to Switzerland. But I'm so thrilled, et cetera, et cetera. That was very meaningful for me because, as I told you, I I learned early that the Jewish tradition has to be wedded with Jesus if you're going to get Jesus and his message right, and it's mutual. You know, I have many rabbi friends, one of whom's written a wonderful book on Jesus, and they, you know, the post Vatican II mentality of ecumenism, you know, has a lot of Jewish theologians sitting down with Christian theologians and working things out together. And I think Heschel is absolutely one of the greatest theologians on the planet of the 20th century. And I depend so much on him for his witness and his courage and his scholarship and his work too. So yeah, and then I worked. I had on my faculty Neil Douglas Klotz. Do you know his work on the Aramaic Jesus? Yeah, in fact, I wrote the foreword to his first book, which is he calls Prayers of the Cosmos, and he retranslates the Our Father and he retranslates the Beatitudes out of the Aramaic language, and you get a totally. It's just what you said. You get a mystical
Totally.
experience, cosmological experience. That's who Jesus was. He taught, and of course, all pre-modern people, you know, they're not in their heads. They begin with the universe. That's what I love about the medieval mystics. They're pre-moderns, and like
Yes.
Hildegard, Francis, Aquinas, Eckhart, they all, and Julian, they all begin with the goodness of creation. You see, with original blessing. They don't begin with sin, which is a human thing. We're the only species that sins, and we're really good at it. And but to begin there is just more of our narcissism, you know. And Pope Francis, I give him credit. He talks about the narcissism of our species, that the modern era. I think, therefore I am. That's so crazy. And
It is
that's
crazy.
Descartes. He's still the father of Western education, for God's sake. Is horrendous, and is why we have an ecological collapse going on. Because if you only think about the I and the human, begin with the human, that's leaving out 13.8 billion years of creation, you know. That's kind of a big lacuna. So no wonder we're so messed up and we're busy
Yeah.
destroying the planet as we know it. So all this is related, and it makes sense. And oh, by the way, here's your Via Creativa, isn't it? That's Miles
Amazing. I was looking
Davis.
at it. It's absolutely
It's a
beautiful.
wonderful painting, isn't it? I've always loved that. 25-year-old young African American in Oakland, where I lived for 34 years before I moved up here. He painted that, and I love it. I've been living with it, and it shows Miles Davis at different times in his life. But I love the dancers and everything, the energy of music, and
Beautiful.
well, that's you. You did your
Yeah.
PhD on dance. There you go. That's up your alley.
It's a powerful energy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for explain. That was wonderful what you just shared. Well, you mentioned Neil Douglas Klotz, you know, with the
Mm.
Aramaic. Let's talk about that a little bit. I chant in Aramaic. Aramaic is a language that I found a few years back, and
Uh-huh.
I was fascinated first when I was in university because I studied the Dead Sea Scrolls, and
Mm.
I had never heard of them before. Of course, being raised
Oh.
Catholic, and I saw a little poster, and I said, "Ooh, that sounds very mysterious," you know. And I wasn't studying theology, right? I was studying art and music and dance. And so I went up to the
Mhm.
teacher and I said, I'm really interested in this. How can I learn? And he said, well, I can teach you Aramaic, but you have to have another person with you. There has to be two, so I can get permission from the university, and it's all done through the Bible. And I said, okay, fine. So I had to convince one of my friends, and she's like, I don't want to do Aramaic. And I said, please, I really need to read the Dead Scrolls, and I want to find out what this language is about. And I think I was probably remembering something from a past life. I don't know if you believe in that, but I felt that. And so I did the Aramaic. I did it for a year. We read the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I was fascinated. It stayed in me. Life got in the way. I continued studying, PhD, all of this. And then when I started chanting the Lord's Prayer, which I started doing when I lived in Egypt, because I lived in the Middle East for many years, something shifted really powerfully in me. And this is the question I'm soon going to ask you. Sometimes I take a long time to ask, but anyway,
No, I like your
it
stories.
coincided that I started chanting the Lord's Prayer, and I was living in Egypt. My daughter was really, really young, and I was living in front of a mosque. And I would wake up really early when the call to prayer, and I would have my coffee in the balcony in my apartment, and I would see them just doing their body prayer, the men outside, and I became fascinated. And so one day I said, I'm going to do it with them, right?
Oh,
And so I was on the balcony and I was just doing that body prayer. And then one day I just incorporated the Lord's Prayer to that prayer that they were doing in the mosque. And something really powerful shifted in me. I felt Yeshua, right? I felt Yeshua's presence. And so this fascinated me. And so I ended up studying Aramaic in the biblical university online in Israel, right? And then one of the things that I learned, and since you mentioned Neil Douglas Klotz, when we go into the study of Aramaic, and he is a great scholar, and I think you probably are as well, in Aramaic, I feel, and Neil Douglas Klotz says that it's a feminine language, right? Because it connects more of the hemispheres, because it is a Semitic language. Um, and so my question is, when we pray in Aramaic, and I'm moving away from the mind now, I feel it is possible to receive transmissions from the great high holy teachers who spoke in this language. Do you feel that? Because we can when we read a sacred text in English. When we read Yeshua in Aramaic, do you feel that he's more present?
Well, I'll tell you, Neil Douglas Klotz led us in body prayer every morning at my school at Holy Names College. And that was when he was writing his first book too. And he asked me to write the foreword to it. But I'll tell you, when we first did, because in body prayer, he draws and universal prayer, the dance is universal peace. He draws from many traditions, the Sufi and the Christian and Jewish and so forth. But I'll never forget the very first time that I danced with him in the circle, chanting the Our Father in Aramaic. Jesus appeared in the middle of the circle, just like you had that experience. You felt the presence. I felt the presence, and I saw something too. And it was so clearly, because I mean, that's what prayer is. Prayer is always about opening the door of our
Okay,
hearts.
yeah.
Jesus said, I am the door. And but he really came through for you, and he came through the door for me. And in that context. But I think he can show up through closed doors. That's the story, one of the stories of the resurrection too, that the Spirit opens humanity's consciousness in so many ways. And of course, that's what artists do too. I mean, that's why art is so central, that it's as I said, the Holy Spirit at work. Aquinas has this wonderful line that I'm sure you'll appreciate. He says, the same Spirit that hovered over creation at the beginning hovers over the mind of the artist at work.
Always.
And I just love that. And we're all artists. That's the thing. That doesn't mean, the person who's making his living on art, who was
All
a
of us,
genius
all
or
of us.
something. All of us. But that's and this is what science says. Now, I work a lot with Brian Swim as a cosmologist, also with Rupert Sheldrake, who I've written 2 books with. So I try to work with scientists too. But Brian's told me this story years ago. I'll never forget it. He says the fireball burned, the beginning of creation for 750,000 years, and then it went out of business, so to speak. But it had launched creation, and what followed, the atoms, and then the galaxies and all of it. But he said that same fireball, which is alive in these atoms, is also alive in our minds when we get excited or moved. That literally fire is going off in our brains, and that is the same as the original fireball. It's a continuation. It is now incarnated as humans. And then you go to John's Gospel, John 1, for example, the Christ is a light in all beings. And that's the new physics, that there are photons, light waves, in every atom in the universe. So I mean, there is your cosmic Christ. So the thing is a continuity. There's a continuity going on here, and that we humans have this amazing um, capacity to, as Salem, images of God, to, as you say, to participate in this light, in this co-creation. And what the Kabbalah talks about, the sparks of the soul, sparks of the soul, and the sparks of everything, that everything has a spark inside. And it's here to ignite.
Yeah.
And that's really what the mystical journey is about, is participating with and sharing that light and those sparks, and moving us beyond our shadow side, which would want to control everything and own everything, and
Yeah.
fill ourselves with greed instead of with love and generosity and beauty and celebration. That's one reason I love this painting. It,
Yeah.
it is about celebration, and Aquinas says, sheer joy is God's, and this demands companionship. So he's saying the whole universe exists because of joy, and and divinity itself wants to share the joy, and that's how we should respond to life, with joy, and not just our own joy, but making it possible for others, and that's what justice is about. So life isn't as complicated as we often make it.
That I totally agree. I wanted this. I love how you said we're here to participate.
Mm, mm,
And because I see that participation as that co-creation with the divine, with source, and that the first word of the Genesis, Bereshit, right? I translate it as creation, creating infinitely. And
mm,
if we don't participate, we can't create, right? Because
mm,
there is this when we think of what they have taught us in the West, and it happens a lot even in the New Age world, right? First, take care of yourself, first you, then others. Everything is the I. But then there's no participation. And if we are made in the image of the divine, of Allah, if we're made in that image, and God is creator, then we are here to create. And the only way to create is to participate, right? To participate in the present moment, and to participate with everything that is happening around us, right? With those people around us, relationships. Sometimes we're taught to focus so much on the self, and even healing. Healing is important, but you mentioned the Kabbalah, and one thing that I like about the Kabbalists is that they say, if you need to heal, if you're going through a really tough time, take a certain amount of your day for healing. Say, I'm going to heal between 7 and 8 p.m. at night.
mm.
And the rest of the day, feel joy and participate in life. And I really took
Wonderful.
that seriously. And I started to say,
Uh,
okay, when I need to heal, I'm going through a dark night, and you know, as we all ascend as humans and everything happening in the planet, we're having a lot of dark nights lately, right? As a humanity.
Yeah,
And
right.
so,
You
you
bet.
know, when I go through a dark night, I'm going to do it between 7 and 8. I'm going to cry, I'm
I
gonna
love
scream,
that.
I'm going to write,
I
dance.
love that. There's great wisdom in that. Excellent.
And
Yes, I
then,
talked today about the dark night of our species, not just the dark
oh,
night of the soul.
could you
And
speak
Rabbi
about
Heschel
it?
said that we should talk about the dark night of society, not just the dark night of of the soul. And so I've carried it one further. I talk about the dark night of our species because I think that our species is in a collective dark night. But I just love what you just taught there about putting a parameter on it.
Yeah.
Um, you know, your compatriot, Saint John of the Cross.
Yeah.
Um, you know, he was a great poet, of course, and mystic, and one of his great poems is called The Dark Night. But there's that joy in it. You know, it's not all darkness.
No,
It
no,
culminates in a love experience, you see. And so some people, you know, they don't bother reading the poem.
no,
And
no.
but also John himself was suffering. I taught a course, and I'm writing a book now on John the Cross, where I'm
Oh,
trying to show that the four paths are the way to interpret John the Cross, not the three paths. Remember, he was being haunted and hunted by the Inquisition in his day and
yeah.
all that. So he had to be super careful at times. And so he took those three paths and tried to interpret his own poetry, and it doesn't work.
Oh.
Every poet I've met who have translated him in English says, don't bother reading his commentaries. They're just utterly confusing. Go with the poetry. And I
Yes.
couldn't agree more. But I taught a course demonstrating that's what my book is going to be. How the four paths bring out all the depth of his poetry, whereas he gets all convoluted trying to explain his poetry in terms of the three paths. But a big part of that is to keep the Inquisition off his back. But
Yes.
that was another complaint, by the way, that I got from the Vatican is that I'm into these four paths instead of the three paths, and they were right about that. Just like I'm into original blessing much more than original sin.
Of
But
course.
I just love that teaching, and I'm going to share it from the Kabbalah. I was not aware of that. You
Oh,
give a
bless you.
certain time of your day to the dark night, and the
Yeah,
rest,
it
as you
helps.
say, participate. You know, another word for participation that I like a lot today is solidarity. You know,
Beautiful.
that's nice. That's participating
Beautiful.
and it's sharing. And it's a social awareness that is lost in the modern consciousness of I think, therefore I am. You know, that consciousness that has practically killed the sense of community and has made us tribal, um, which is a distortion of community.
Yes.
Tribalism is. But you're calling and I'm calling for that participation and that solidarity. And that's how, you know, that's how the universe works. Interconnectivity is another
Yes.
word that's so important today to science. And it's the whole basis of what compassion is. Meister says, what happens to another, whether it be a joy or a sorrow, happens to me.
Oh,
That's the most perfect definition of compassion I've ever heard. You know, that is about our interdependence. And of course, that's now a really working concept in physics and in science. So this is a moment when science and compassion can link up. We
yeah.
now have the basis of physics is the basis of spirituality, which is compassion. And
Beautiful.
so yeah, that's important too. But
When
thank you
when
for
you were
sharing that
speaking,
teaching.
when you were speaking, Matthew, um, and we started our conversation talking about education, right? That education, spirituality, those are the two things that really need a lot of healing. As you were speaking, I had a vision of children in schools beginning their day by looking at each other in the eyes. I
Mm,
had that
mm,
vision. Wow, you because that
mm.
compassion, that
Nice.
connection, where we can feel each other, right? We can
Yeah.
help each other.
Namaste. Yeah. And find the beauty that's there and the nobility that's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I you know, one of my books is on sacred masculine. Um, And I've been writing about that lately in my daily meditations, because I think this whole rise of fascism and of course, embedded in fascism is misogyny and
Yeah.
sexism, and a perversion of healthy masculinity. It's about controlling and dominating, and it's not about inner strength, which is virtue. But so I wrote this book a few years ago on called The Hidden Spirituality of Men, 10 Metaphors to Awaken the Sacred Masculine. So I go through these archetypes, father sky, of green man, of blue man, of hunter-gatherer and spiritual warriors, or that will allow us to bring the healthy masculine back
Yeah.
instead of this perverse version that is running things, and which is so in tune with the reptilian brain and leaves out the mammal brain, which is the compassionate brain, the brain of family and kinship and all that, and compassion. The first response was from a woman. She wrote me, she said, in my home library, I have over 200 books on the divine feminine and not a single book on the sacred masculine. And I have 2 teenage boys. But she said, I don't regret for a second the last 30 years of my life recovering the divine feminine, the goddess in my life. But you're right, she said. Now we have to bring out the divine, the healthy masculine, and assist our brothers in doing so. So that was one response. And she said, until I read your book, I didn't realize how much men have suffered under
Yeah.
patriarchy.
Definitely.
Yeah. So then I had another response. It was at a conference on spirit and earth. And after I spoke, and there were Q&A, this tall man with long white hair came up to me. And he said, have been a chaplain in a prison for 12 years. And he said, male prisoners don't want to look inside. They want to project onto others all the time. He said, so I've been looking for 12 years for a book that would get men to look inside. And he said, yours is the first book I got. They really got into those archetypes. And he said, as we discussed it, as we got into it, the deeper we got into it, he said, they began to encounter the nobility inside them. I have
Yes.
goosebumps right now telling
Yeah,
you
right.
that
Me too.
phrase, the nobility inside. That's what I'm relating that phrase to your experience about children, your teaching, the idea of children looking into each other's eyes and finding the nobility there.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I think that's exactly what Jesus was teaching, that we're all other Christs, and or other Buddhas or other Selem, images of God, whatever tradition you want to name it, it's that spark of the divine again. And that's why another way of talking about it, be as sons and daughters of God. And to see that in one another, part of our cosmic masses is that during what we call the prayer of peace, we go around and we look each other in the eye and we bow and say namaste, or I see the Christ in you, I honor the Christ in you, I honor the Buddha in you, I honor the image of God in you, whatever. But that people find that very moving, and it's done in silence, except for that singular I honor and namaste. So people really appreciate that a lot. And it's so simple. And the best rituals are simple rituals, and the
Yeah.
children can get into too. And yeah, I'd like to tell you another story about education, if I can, and art.
Yes,
Can I tell you
please.
that? Well, a number of years ago, I left my university that I started, and I said, what's next? And the message I got was, you know, um, to take my model of education into inner cities for teenagers, because at that time in Oakland, where I was living, 64% of Black boys were not graduated from high school.
Wow.
And I said to myself, are they dumb or is education dumb?
Yeah.
So I started this 2-year pilot project with inner city kids who were dropping out of school. And it was an after school program. And what I had them do was to make movies about anything they were interested in. But first, I taught what I call the 10 C's, which are values. And in America, a public school, and I was doing this for the public school system, you can't talk religion.
Yeah.
So I had to invent a device to talk about values. So I invented this thing called the 10 C's. So they're cosmology and ecology, because Thomas Berry says ecology is functional cosmology. Okay, chaos. And these inner city kids have PhDs in chaos. I mean, not one of them was living, but one of them was living with two parents. Few were. Some were living on the streets. Some were living with friends. I mean, it's chaos. They know all about chaos. Creativity, compassion, character development, ceremony, courage, critical thinking, and a couple more. So here's what we say. Now you make a movie about whatever you want, whatever interests you, but throw in a few of the C's. See, that way, see, they're having to create something new, and it's important to wrestle with these C's, you see. And the responses were amazing. I mean, these kids were utterly bored at school. They just came alive because they were invited to make their own movie. And I'll tell you, at the end of the semester, we'd have about 150 adults come, and they each one would stand up and talk about the movie and then show it, and then take questions about the movie. And after the night of sharing like that, this one friend of mine, he's in his 60s, he came up to me and said, Matt, I'm so moved, I can't talk. I'll call you in 48 hours, he said. And here's an example. A 14-year-old, a freshman in high school, he had an uncle who fixed cars, mechanic. And so he decided to make a movie about muscle cars because he was into muscle cars, this 14-year-old. And so he and his uncle worked, and they converted a gasoline engine in a muscle car to a vegetarian engine in the muscle cars. He was dealing with ecology in muscle cars. And at the end of so they show how to do it. And then at the end of the movie, there's a race between a gasoline driven muscle car and a vegetarian muscle car. And you can guess which one won.
Yeah.
Now, that's just one example. He was only 14 years old. There were 5 boys who were 14 who were gay. And they decided to go on the streets of Oakland with a camera and microphone and stop strangers and say, we're gay. What do you think of that? So they made their movie about that and the responses from these people. And I could just see in their semester of working with it, they just grew into their own self-confidence and everything. And it was also funny as well, the gift of humor. But I'm just throwing this out there that the creativity is in everybody, but it
Yes.
has to be invited out. Education comes from the Latin word educere, lead out.
Yeah.
But so much of our education isn't about leading out the wisdom that's in the kids. It's about stuffing them with adult questions and adult prefabricated answers. So again, I'm just emphasizing your point about the role of art in education. But that relates to your thing about honoring the nobility that's inside, that we are all co-creators and participate in the work of the Holy Spirit. That is a work of hovering over the waters at creation.
Definitely. That story is beautiful because it actually brought to me Holy Spirit. You repeat the Holy Spirit a lot. And the Holy
Mm.
Spirit is something that I love to work with in my own way. I feel the Holy Spirit in Aramaic, the Rucha, the Gucha, the Shekhinah, right? The divine feminine
Mm.
presence. I love working with the Shekhinah. And then another thing came to me as well, how you said we just stuff the children with information and don't allow them to become what they're supposed to become, right? Because life is a process of becoming, is a process of, right, like growing like a flower. And so I think that part of our role as participants in this beautiful creation story is to awaken that spark in other people, right?
Mm.
To awaken
Absolutely.
that spark in the children, or even, friends, family, in our own respectful way, because we're all different, right?
Mm.
Um, And so that just came to me when you were speaking. I thought it was so beautiful. Just if we could all be mindful of each other and awaken each other's spark, right? And educate children, because that confidence isn't mental, it's divine. It's the spark. It's not something mental, right?
I couldn't agree more. And um, confidence and trust, that's the real meaning of faith
Yeah.
in the Gospels. That when Jesus says on numerous occasions, go your way, your blank has saved you, has healed you. That word pistuane in the Greek means trust.
Yeah.
And we've translated it as faith, and then we've turned faith into this pile of dogmas and doctrines or something, and we say believe it all.
Yeah.
And it's not participatory, and it's not, and so that's why trust and confidence are so primal.
Yeah.
And can we trust the universe? I mean, Einstein asked that. He said the biggest question you can ask in life is the universe friendly or not? Well, and um, we know how he answered that. And really, I think the whole Jewish tradition answers it that way, that in spite of all the suffering and all the evil, that the universe ultimately is benign. There's this rabbi here who died recently in America, Rabbi Salman Shachner, who used to say, there's more good than the evil in the world, but not by much. I think is very, very practical and very real and very Jewish. That it is a battle,
Yeah.
and that's where you were talking about. We got to participate and not stay on the sidelines. And that's that prophetic dimension you see that is so strong in the Jewish tradition. You have the wisdom tradition that Jesus comes from, but also the prophetic.
Yeah.
So the wisdom I see as the mysticism, that's our yes to life.
Yes.
And then the prophetic, as Heschel says, the prophet interferes. So the prophetic is a no to the forces in life that are disruptive of life and beauty and justice, therefore, and compassion. So that's the real spiritual game going on here, I think. And it's we're in a period where there's plenty of suffering going on that is so beyond necessary. I mean, why can't all humanity get together and battle with climate change? And that
Yes.
would bring us all together.
Yeah.
Um, and that's how Mandela said that. It was Mandela who said that if you want to make peace with your enemies, you have to work side by side with them. And this could bring us all side by side if we put the earth first, because all of us are nothing, and all of our religions are nothing, and all of our businesses are nothing, and all of our ideologies and all of our nationhoods and all the rest. It's all nothing if Mother Earth collapses on our watch, which is exactly what's happening. So this is the very primal moment, I think, that our generation's living through. And I hope that we get our act together before it's too late, because the, the climate change issue is I've been saying for years that ecology is the number one, the number two, and the number three moral issue of our time.
It
And
is.
it's just become more real with the latest statistics and facts and science and the melting of Greenland, Antarctica, and all the rest. Uh, we really have to partner and feel this interconnectivity, not only between all humans, but between us and the rest of nature.
Because we're all connected. Yes. And I mean, even a few weeks ago in Spain, you probably saw the floods that were,
Uh, yeah,
that it was
yeah,
like Noah's Ark and like the flooding, right? And it
yeah,
felt biblical. It felt so
yeah,
biblical.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. Apocalyptic,
Yeah.
biblical. Yeah,
I
yeah.
just
Well, here in
find
in California, we've had
Yeah,
droughts for so
that,
long.
that's true.
Same thing.
And
It goes from drought to flood to hurricane to wildfires. Oh, we've had so many wildfires up here near where I live. And, I mean, you can be 100 miles from a wildfire, but your sky is totally affected.
yes,
Northern California is famous for blue sky, the color of my shirt here. But often now we have these gray skies and bad smells, and you get warning, don't take your dog for a walk, don't let your
yes.
children out, all this stuff. This is the time we're living in.
Yeah,
And of course, the sea's rising. And I mean, these countries, including America, are so nervous about immigration today. Wait till the seas rise another foot or two. There's going to be millions of people on the march having to leave
yeah,
flooded big cities all around the world because humans, of course, built a lot of our biggest, greatest cities on on water. And I mean, this is just a picnic today compared to what's coming if we don't get together and in solidarity and put all of our ingenuity and our creativity and our science and our technology into that instead of making more dumb weapons.
yes.
It's just so obvious, but humanity is very stubborn and stupid at
Yeah,
times.
this is beautiful what you mentioned, no? Because with everything going on and so many wars and so many blood pouring out into Mother Earth, I ask myself that question all the time. If we could just take all of the energy that part of humanity uses to do bad and shift it to the good, right? Because it's energy, it doesn't matter which way, but if we do it to the
Right?
good, and
Yeah.
even the resources, instead of just keep spending, shift those resources to create things that can expand and help people grow. And and you said something really interesting. You said that the prophetic
Mm.
we're battling. It's all
Yeah.
about the battle between also the good and the evil within us, right?
The
Yeah,
jihad. Yes. Amen.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
to even understand that battle that we live within us as well, and to choose the goodness, even on a
Exactly.
bad day, choose the goodness, right? Choose the creativity, choose love. And if we could just all, because sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we wake up, we're not well.
Yeah.
It's the chaotic human form of the emotion, right? One day we're fine, the next day we're not. But if we could be okay with not being okay, yet choose love and choose creativity, right?
Deuteronomy, I put before you life and death, choose life. You know, it requires choice, just what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's the via creativa. You
Yeah.
know, every artist is asked to choose. How big is this painting going to be? And what's the subject or its colors, its form. I mean, so choice is part of our creativity.
Yes.
And
I like that. I like that. Thank
if
you.
if creativity is not honored, then when choice does come along, and of course the Latin word for choice is electio, election. But when choice does come around, a lot of people flunk it. In America's recent election, 89 million Americans chose not to vote.
Wow,
So
that's
there were more Americans who didn't vote, far more Americans who chose not to vote than who voted for the winner,
wow.
who we know by name. So that's pretty significant. Where did Americans learn not to vote? This big number of Americans. And what are they doing instead? And now, and someone said to me the other day, we should be like New Zealand and Australia, where you have to vote. You get fined if you don't vote.
Oh, I
Because
like
then I
that.
like it too. Some of these 89 million will get off their couches and make a decision and maybe pay a little more attention to the importance of politics and also run for office stuff. If you don't like what's going on, then run for office, become a politician yourself. There are many things to do besides just be passive,
This is
and that because
important
that's
what
not
you're
choosing.
saying. Yeah, this is important because part of spirituality is being in the world. Part of spirituality in the spiritual path is being in politics, is being the householder, is being in community, right? That is a spiritual. Uh, the spiritual is not just about being in the cave and meditating and thinking of our own
No,
healing. And yes, I feel
no,
great when I do my practice in the morning, but can I take that practice outside? Can I take it,
exactly.
right?
It's tikkun. It's tikkun. It's working for the
Cool.
redemption of the world.
Yeah,
And that yeah, and that's really the gift of, I think, of the Jewish tradition and the
yeah,
prophetic tradition. I mean, there are many gifts. That's a very important one because I think in the East there can be a kind of complacency because of the theory of reincarnation. You
yeah.
can say, "Oh well, next time around things will be better," but it doesn't work that way. And
No,
Gandhi himself said that. He said, "I learned to say no from the West." See, he learned that from Jesus and from the Jewish prophets, which Jesus was one, that there is this no to life as well as a yes to life. And you can't be overly complacent about just letting things roll. You have to stand up like he did and interfere with what is wrong, and inspire others to do it too. Um, and that's why he was the leader that he was. I think the spiritual
definitely.
avatar that he was, and of course he gave those lessons and practices such as nonviolence and filling the jails and all that stuff. He gave it to King, and he went on to Mandela and all this. So I mean, good things have happened um, because this choice to stand up and be counted. Yeah.
Beautiful. I want to ask you one last question. If not, I'll keep you here for hours because I love speaking to you. You are just full of wisdom and I don't know, just such beautiful energy, Matthew. So I wanted to ask you, what does the rise of the Magdalene, of Mary Magdalene, mean to you? What is your perception of this connection to Mary Magdalene?
Sure. Well, I think among other things, it's a return of the divine feminine. It's acknowledging the role of women and women as leaders in the story of Jesus. And of course, the distortion of Mary Magdalene, which came from the top, it came from Pope Gregory. So the distortion that she was some kind of prostitute or something, um, has been with Christians longer than the truer story. If Jesus was married, no doubt, I think Mary Magdalene was his wife. But I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that question. It's not that important anyway. There's a very fine book by a really good New Testament scholar, Bruce Chilton, Chilton. He wrote what I think is the best book ever written on Jesus called Rabbi Jesus. I highly recommend it. And, he's a fully fledged New Testament scholar, and his story's interesting. He was not raised Christian. And when he was like 19, he was traveling the world, and he ended up in Greece, and he walked into a little Greek church, and Greek Orthodox church, and he saw the Christ on a cross, and he was hit by it because he was wrestling with the question of evil, and it just hit him, and then he followed Jesus. He became a Christian and an Episcopalian, actually, and a priest, and he studied theology and languages, a lot of languages. In fact, he's coming out with a new book on the Aramaic Jesus. I'm sure you'll love it. Yeah, it's coming out this spring. So keep your eye out for that. Yeah, Bruce Chilton. But he wrote a real good book on Mary Magdalene. And he says that, Magdala, the town of Magdala, was famous for healing. And she really was a healer. And he says that Jesus entrusted the healing ministry to her. And that from that, we got the idea of the sacraments. So she's really the mother of the sacraments and of healing. So I love his treatment because he sticks with the scriptures, including, of course, the apocalyptic gospel of Mary and so forth. So, but he treats it in a scholarly way, but also a very personal way. He was a parish priest at the Bard University in upstate New York. So he's not trying to throw bombs into theology, because he had to relate to human beings every week, and so forth, at the same time that he was a professor. But he does a real good job of relating to, of communicating and translating, if you will, and taking the latest scholarship and putting the Dead Sea Scrolls into reinterpreting the New Testament. And I'm very excited that his most latest book is on the Aramaic Jesus. I think you will be too.
Oh,
He
yes.
did a
I
real
can't
good
wait
book
to
a couple of years
read.
ago. Yeah, he did a whole book on the resurrection, which is really fabulous. I just love it. I mean, he and I have taught courses together. We taught a course at my university on historical Jesus and the cosmic Christ, and that was really, really fun. But anyway, I recommend his book on Mary Magdalene. It's not long, it's short, but it really has a lot of really good lessons there. Um, so I see Mary, as I said, as integral to the reawakening of the presence of the divine feminine in our lives, and of a real person in Jesus' life, uh, who was woman. And of course, I love what Meister Eckhart does with the Mary Martha story. He turns it inside out in 180 degrees. He says Mary was immature spiritually, and Martha was more mature, because Martha could do two things at once. She could work the kitchen and listen to Jesus in the next room. But Mary could only contemplate. He said someday Mary will grow up to be as mature as Martha. And that's what you were talking about, being in the world and working in the world, and
Yeah.
not just doing that one thing of contemplation. It's about contemplation and action together
Yes.
that makes us whole. And that to me is the mystical and the prophetic. It's wisdom in Israel, and it's the prophets in Israel. And I like that dialectic a lot. Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. I asked you about Mary Magdalene because, as you know, I work with many light beings. Yes, from Mary Magdalene, but Mary Magdalene is strong, because I had an apparition of her in 2011, and as a raised Catholic, I didn't know anything about the Da Vinci codes or anything like that. I hadn't read it. Um, and so just to close this, but don't go, because I want to say goodbye with you to you when I turn off the video. But you talked about the reawakening of the divine masculine, right? Of like the healing of the masculine. And one of the things that I do every day is I like to read sacred scripture really, or I wake up at 3:34 in the morning and I read at that time, because it is said that the angels are with us in that time, and it's the Amrit Vela in the Hindu spirituality. And I've read the Gnostic Gospels, my favorite Gospel of Philip. I love the Gospel of Philip. And
Oh,
so I'm reading the Zohar, right? The Zohar, the Book of Splendor. And since we finished our last topic on Mary Magdalene, I was contemplating in the last weeks about what is the true feminine, right? Just like we can contemplate what is the true masculine. And
mm,
there was a story I read in the Zohar about Sarah the matriarch and Abraham, and when they were going to Egypt, and how he was walking and they were married, and he knew he was married to Sarah. And then all of a sudden he looked at her, and he looked at her in a different way. And for the first time, he realized, wait a minute, she's beautiful physically. And so when they were arriving in Egypt, he got a little bit scared, because he said, wow, if they see that she's so beautiful, they're going to kill me, they're going to take her. So they hid her in a chest, right? And so they were walking and they were carrying the chest, and she was hiding in the chest. And then when they got to Egypt, the Egyptians that worked for the Pharaoh said, there's a light coming out of the chest. Why
ah,
is there a light coming out? He said, oh, nothing. And they opened up the chest, and it was Sarah. And while everyone looked very tired. She was like radiant, glowing light. And they asked Abraham, who is she? Oh, she's my sister, because if not, they would have killed him, of course. But they took her to the Pharaoh. And the reason why they took her to the Pharaoh wasn't because she was physically beautiful. It was because the light that was concealed was the same as the light that was revealed. That's powerful, right?
That's very powerful.
Yeah. And then I said,
Now, that's not a story found in the Bible. That's found in the Zohar. Is that
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Ah,
I said the light that was concealed, the strong was the same as the light that was revealed. And so I realized that that story just made me cry. That is
oh,
the feminine within men and women, the soul, right? That light that is hidden, that's concealed. When we can reveal that light with the same power, without the shadows, without the duality, without the pain, right? Without the judgment, that's the true beauty, right? And so
beautiful.
I just wanted to share that since we finished
Thank you.
our
And the
talk.
timing is so right with Advent on its way.
Yes, yes.
And and Hanukkah too, of
And
course, the
Hanukkah,
whole
my little
season
Hanukkah thing
of
back there.
that. There you go. Yeah, that's a beautiful story. If I could close with a little story too,
Yes,
can I do that?
please, please.
It relates to your love of dance.
Hmm.
You know, I met Susanna Heschel's daughter, and she told this story how when she was a child, she was 10 years old. Her father came back from marching at Selma, and there's a lot of opposition in the Jewish community in America at the time for his marching with Martin Luther King and all that. Because they said to him, look, there's enough anti-Semitism in America. Let's not stir that pot of racism and all that too. And he just ignored all that objection. But it was so strong that she said that when she gives talks in a Jewish home, and there is that famous picture of him marching with King and Selma, she tells them, take that picture down. You don't have a right to show that because when he needed your support, he did not get it. You were criticizing him for it. So that's pretty strong. But then she tell the story when she was 10, his father came home from marching in Selma, and she said to him, Daddy, what was it like? And he said, I felt that my feet were praying. And I
Hmm.
think that's just a beautiful marriage. It's just what you're doing with your hands. Marriage of the mystical and
Yes.
the prophetic, and of art and prophetic. You see
Yes.
that uh, that your feet were praying. Well, your feet were dancing. They were
Yeah.
marching. And so anyway, I thought that was a nice kind of
It's
wind up
beautiful.
to
It's
our conversation.
beautiful. I want to say in front of anyone that will be watching this that I'm so, I feel so much love in my heart right now to have been able to have this beautiful talk with you. I feel an awakening within me. I feel wisdom. I feel that my body has been opened, and I feel that I have received so much from you. And everything that you do, Matthew, is just, it's amazing. And I honor your strength, your courage, because I know you've been through a lot as well, a lot of changes in your life, and I honor the commitment. This there's so many ways to say love in Hebrew. Ahava is one, which also means love in service, love in action. It's the choice to be love, the choice to be in service. And I see you as Ahava. I see you as that beautiful energy of commitment and service and participation in this beautiful cosmic dance that we are all in, right? This Bereshit. And so if you want to say anything before I turn the camera off.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your work and for your um, insights and your opening up your heart and your mind to the wisdom of both your traditions, well, of many traditions, the Jewish and the Christian, the Muslim and the Eastern as well. I think this is a sign of the times that we're living in, that the spirit is not restricted um, to one path. what I call one well. There's one underground river and many wells into it. And the future, I think, of humanity's hopes lie in the return of the divine and feminine and restructuring of the sacred masculine, but also in this gathering of the wisdom from all the world traditions, and they seem to be happening right in your space there. And that's a positive thing. So I appreciate very much the grace and the energy that we've shared. And if people want to find more of me, they can find it at MatthewFox.org or the Meditations
Perfect.
with Matthew Fox.
Thank you for being here and for your presence during this sacred talk in Mystical Pathways. And again, for all of the information on Matthew Fox, events that are coming up, the books that he has written, below I am leaving information. So thank you again. And if you have any questions, if you want to leave any comments, any reflections, remember that this is a way to participate. This is participation. Ahava.